All right. Hi there. It is 2/4/24. It is 24/24. We're going to be working on Abraham and Isaac today. We're going to be doing chapters Genesis 20 through 25. I got some verses up here if you'd like to write them down and look them up later. But we're going to be talking about Abraham because all this stuff in the beginning tells us where and why we are today. Like, how do you know where you're going unless you know where you've been, right? Like, how do you know you want to be rich unless you've been poor, right? So we're going to be starting in Genesis chapter 20. And this is Abraham again making the mistake of saying that Sarah was his sister again. That which Isaac will actually end up doing, and history always intends to repeat itself. So in chapter 20, and Abraham journeyed from thence toward the south country and dwelled between Kadesh and Shur and sojourned in Gerar. And Abraham said of Sarah's wife, she is my sister. And Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent and took Sarah. This is where Abraham is going to meet Abimelech for the first time. But God came to Abimelech in a dream by night and said to him, behold, thou art but a dead man. For the woman which thou hast taken, for she is a man's wife. But Abimelech had not come near her, with which to know he has not known her or had any relations with her. And he said, Lord, wilt thou slay also a righteous nation? Said he not unto me, she is my sister. And she even herself said, he is my brother, in the integrity of my heart and innocency of my hands have I done this. And God said unto him in a dream, yeah, I know that thou didst this in the integrity of thy heart, for I also withheld thee from sinning against me. Therefore suffered I thee not to touch her. Now therefore restore the man his wife, for he is a prophet, and he shall pray for thee, and thou shalt live. And if thou restore her not, know that thou shalt surely die, thou and all that are thine. So if you don't return her to Abraham, I'm going to kill you and everybody in your family. Therefore Abimelech rose early in the morning and called his servant and told all these things in their ears, and the men were sore afraid. Then Abimelech called Abraham and said unto him, what hast thou done unto us, and what have I offended thee, that thou hast brought on me on my kingdom a great sin? Thou hast done deeds unto me that ought not to be done. And Abimelech said unto Abraham, what sawest thou that thou hast done this thing? And Abraham said, because I thought, this is Abraham thinking, instead of trusting God that he's going to be safe out of harm's way, and his wife's going to be safe out of harm's way, he thinks that if he sojourns here in which is this is a part of Egypt, I believe. This is where all this stuff in Egypt with Moses and all this stuff actually comes from. So, and we'll see here soon that Abimelech and Abraham actually come to understanding a couple chapters later to make a covenant by this will. But that's not yet. So, Abraham says, I thought that you would have killed me and taken my wife if I would have said she was my wife. So I told you that she was my sister. And it says, indeed, in 12 it says, and yet indeed she is my sister. She is the daughter of my father, but not the daughter of my mother. And she became my wife. So it's not technically a lie, says Abraham, because she technically is my sister. And it came to pass when God caused me to wander from my father's house, that I said unto her, this is thy kindness, which thou shalt show unto me, at every place whither we shall come. Say of me, he is my brother. And Abimelech took sheep and oxen and men servants and women servants, and gave them unto Abraham, and restored him Sarah's wife. So Abimelech gives Abraham all these goods yet again for the second time. Abraham gets all these animals and all this wealth from another king here, so that God won't kill him. And Abimelech said, behold, my land is before me, dwell wherever it pleaseth. So Abraham, go wherever you want in my land, for my land is your land, and dwell wherever pleaseth thee. And unto Sarah he said, Behold, I have given thy brother 1,000 pieces of silver. Behold, he is to thee a covering of thy eyes unto all that are with thee and with all other. Thus she was reproved. So Abraham prayed unto God, and God healed Abimelech and his wife and his maidservants, and they bare children. For the Lord had fast closed up all the wombs of the house of Abimelech because of Sarah, Abraham's wife. So as soon as Abraham got in this city here and lied, God closed up all the wombs of the women. Why? Because God had promised Abraham, and he had promised Sarah, that I will have a child. I'm going to give you a child. So if any of these other kings has relations with Sarah, it's not going to be so. But God preserved Sarah's womb, and he closed up all the wombs on the behalf of Sarah, so that she could not conceive any other way but from God, the Holy Spirit himself. And 21, and the Lord visited Sarah, and the Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did unto Sarah as he had spoken. For Sarah conceived and bare Abraham a son in his old age at the set time of which God had spoken to him. And Abraham called the name of his son that was born unto him, whom Sarah bare to him, Isaac. And Abraham circumcised his son Isaac, being 8 days old, as God had commanded him. And Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born unto him. So if you go back up there where it says in Genesis 17, 1 through 16, that this is when God gave this circumcision for a token to Abraham. Go back here. In Genesis 17, 1 through 16. And when Abraham was 99 years old and 9, the Lord appeared to Abraham. We just read over here that he came to Abraham and gave Abraham a son when he was 100. Over here in 17, it says, and Abraham was 99 years old, and the Lord appeared unto Abram, and said unto him, I am the Almighty God, walk before me, and thou be perfect. And I will make my covenant between me and thee, and will multiply thee exceedingly. And Abraham fell on his face, and God talked with him, saying, As for me, behold, my covenant is with thee, and thou shalt be a father of many nations. Neither shall thy name any more be called Abram, but thy name shall be Abraham, for a father of many nations have I made thee. And I will make thee exceedingly fruitful, and I will make nations of thee, and kings shall come out of thee. And I will establish my covenant between me and thee, and thy seed after thee, and their generations, for an everlasting covenant, to be a God unto thee, and to thy seed after thee. And I will give unto thee, and to thy seed after thee, the land wherein thou art a stranger, all the land of Canaan, for an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. And God said unto Abraham, Thou shalt keep my covenant, therefore thou and thy seed after thee in their generations. This is my covenant which ye shall keep between me and you and thy seed after thee. Every man child among you shall be circumcised, and ye shall be circumcised the flesh of your foreskin, and it shall be a token of the covenant between me and you. And and he that is 8 days old shall be circumcised among you, every man child in your generations. He that is born in the house, or bought with money of any stranger which is not of thy seed, he that is born in thy house, and he that is bought with thy money, must needs be circumcised. And my covenant shall be in your flesh for an everlasting covenant. And the uncircumcised man child whose flesh is foreskin is not circumcised, that soul shall be cut off from his people. He hath broken my covenant. And God said unto Abraham, as for Sarai, thy wife, thou shalt not call her name Sarai, but Sarah shall her name be. And I will bless her, and give thee a son also of her. Yeah, I will bless her, and she be a mother of nations. Kings of people shall be of her. This is the only time that God ever tells a woman that he's going to bless her, and that kings are going to come out of her, and promises that kings are going to come out of her. So it's important to know here that in Genesis 21 verse 5, Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born unto him, and that Abraham circumcised him just as God had commanded him to do, because it is a token, it is a sign of that you are of God's people. This right here sets off what's going to come about in the chapters to come, and in the videos that we'll do later. But this is where all of this comes from. And Sarah said, God hath made me to laugh, so that all that hear will laugh with me. And that's actually what Isaac's name means. It means laughter. And she said, who would have said unto Abraham that Sarah should have given children suck? For I have borne him a son in his old age. And the child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast the same day that Isaac was weaned. And Sarah saw the son of Hagar the Egyptian, which she had borne unto Abraham, mocking. So you got Ishmael here in verse 9. He's actually mocking and making fun of Isaac, because he is, technically, quote, he thinks he's the firstborn son. But he is the firstborn son of Abraham, but he's not that promised seed in which God had promised. But Ishmael now is making fun of Isaac, just as Hagar had made fun of Sarah. And at this time, Sarah, she's just had enough. And she says, wherefore she said unto Abraham, cast out this bondwoman and her son, for the son of this bondwoman shall be heir with my son, or shall not be heir with my son, even with Isaac. And the thing was very grievous in Abraham's sight because of his son. And God said unto Abraham, let it not be grievous in thy sight because of thy lad, and because of thy bond woman, and all that Sarah has said unto thee, hearken unto her voice, for in Isaac shall thy seed be called. And also of the son of the bondwoman will I make a nation, because he is thy seed indeed. And Abraham rose up early in the morning, and took bread and a bottle of water, and gave it unto Hagar, putting it on her shoulder and the child, and sent her away. And she departed and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. So in 13 it says, and also of the son of the bondwoman will I make a nation, because he is thy seed. And then when you get down here to verse 18, we'll get to. Remember 13 there, that God said he's going to make him a nation. And the water was spent in the bottle, and she cast the child under one of the shrubs, and she went and sat down, and sat her down over against a good way off, as it were a bow shot away, or a stone's throw away. For she said, let me not see the death of the child. And she sat over against him, and lift up her voice and wept. Because right now she's scared. They have no water, and she believes her son is going to die. But God says, and God heard the voice of the lad, and the angel of God called to Hagar out of heaven, and said unto her, what aileth thee, Hagar? Fear not, for God hath heard the voice of the lad where he is. Arise, lift up the lad, and hold him in thine hand, for I will make him a great nation. So when it says that he's going to make him a great nation, and whenever we get to chapter 25, verses 15 and 16, you'll actually find out where Ishmael has 12 sons of his own. And these 12 sons are actually princes born unto Ishmael. So, God did not lie, but he's still not the promised son, which will actually be interesting later whenever we get to the end of this. And God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water, and she went and filled the bottle with water and gave the lad a drink. And God was with the lad, and he grew and dwelt in the wilderness, and became an archer. So he's a bowsman. He's a bow and arrow guy. He goes out and he becomes one of the first archers. And he dwelt in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother took him a wife out of the land of Egypt. So Ishmael is going to marry an Egyptian woman. And why is that significant? Because by the time you get to Exodus, you'll see how Abimelech and Ishmael and Abraham and Isaac, how they all become into the future of how Egypt indwells, the Israelites, and God has to rescue them. But all of this starts right here. Ishmael's wife was an Egyptian bride. And it came to pass at that time that Abimelech and Phicol, the chief captain of his host, spake unto Abraham, saying, God is with thee in all that thou doest. Now therefore swear unto me here by God that thou wilt not deal falsely with me, nor with my son, nor with my son's sons, but according to the kindness that I have done unto thee, thou shalt do unto me, and to the land wherein thou hast sojourned, which means that's where Abraham wanders. And Abraham said, I will swear. And Abraham reproved Abimelech because of a well water, which Abraham's servants had violently taken away. So Abraham, he reproves or he yells at Abimelech for his men taking this well. But Abimelech actually says, and Abimelech said, I wot not who had done this thing, neither didst thou tell me, neither yet heard I of it, but today. And Abraham took sheep and oxen and gave them unto Abimelech, and both of them made a covenant. And Abraham set 7 ewe lambs of the flock by themselves. And Abimelech said unto Abraham, what means these 7 ewe lambs which thou hast set by themselves? And he said, for these 7 ewe lambs shalt thou take of my hand, that they may be a witness unto me that I have digged this well. So I believe that at this well that they're speaking of right now is the same well that God opened Hagar's eyes to in Ishmael when they were dying of thirst. And now you got Abraham and Abimelech kind of feuding over this well that neither one of them seems to know where it came from either. But either way, they make a covenant right here and now that they will always be sure to one another, and they're not going to harm one another. Wherefore he called the place Beersheba, because there they swore both of them. Thus they made a covenant of Beersheba. Then Abimelech rose up and Phicol the chief captain of his host, and they returned into the land of the Philistines. And Abraham planted a grove in Beersheba and called there on the name of the Lord, the everlasting God. And Abraham sojourned in the Philistines land many days. So we also know that like in the land of the Philistines, where does that come from? That comes from David and Goliath, when the Philistines and the Israelites are fighting and David actually slews Goliath. They're talking about the Philistines all the way over here in Genesis chapter 21, and the David and Goliath thing don't happen till much later. In 1st or 2nd Kings and in Samuel, but all that stuff comes later. But so here comes the famous Genesis chapter 22. This is the famous offering of Isaac, the only begotten son. Just as God gave his only begotten son, Abraham is about to offer his only begotten son. So, and it came to pass after these things that God did tempt Abraham and said unto him, Abraham, and he said, behold, here I am. So here I am, God. Yes, God, what can I do for you? In James 1, 12 through 15, it says, blessed is the man that endureth temptation, for when he is tried, he shall receive the crown of life, which the Lord hath promised to them that love him. And in Proverbs 3, which I didn't write that up there, I should have, but in Proverbs 3, 11 and 12, it says, my son, despise not the chastising of the Lord, neither be weary of his correction, for whom the Lord loveth, he correcteth, even as a father the son in who he delighteth. And in Hebrews 12, 5 through 8, it actually says the same thing, that God will chastise those that whom he loves. Well, why? Because a father will reprimand his son, especially when sin lies at the door. So in James 12 through 15, here's 13. Let no man say when he is tempted, I am tempted of God, for God cannot be tempted with evil, neither tempteth he any man. But every man is tempted when he is drawn away from his own lust and enticed. Then when lust hath conceived, it bringeth forth sin, and sin, when it is finished, bringeth forth death. In Job 5:17, it says, behold, happy is the man whom God correcteth. Therefore despise not thou the chastising of the Almighty. So even though, as a young child you get reprimanded or in trouble by your parents because you've done wrong, and no child likes to be reprimanded or yelled at or punished, but as you get older you understand that they only did that because they loved you. How do you know that? Because you continue that trend by punishing your own kids when they do wrong. And you got something to say about it. But here it says, and it came to pass after these things that God did tempt Abraham and said unto him, Abraham, And he said, here I am. It says here that God tempted Abraham. But he tempted Abraham of what? Again, it says up here in James that God doesn't tempt any man to do evil. And that's true. Because God, he's not tempting Abraham to do evil. He's bringing God, he's teaching Abraham a lesson about his only begotten son, that when it says that Abraham put his faith in God, this is when Abraham put his faith in God. And God knew at the end of this, when we get done reading this, that God knew that no matter what, he could trust that God knew that Abraham has learned his lesson. And there were no more lessons for Abraham to learn. And Abraham, in Hebrews 11, 17 through 19, by faith Abraham, when he was tried, offered up Isaac, and he that had received the promises offered up his only begotten son, of whom it was said that in Isaac shall thy seed be called, of whom it was said that in Isaac shall thy seed be called, accounting that God was able to raise him up even from the dead, from whence also he received him in a figure, which if you keep reading here, 19 through the rest of it, you'll actually see that this one event where God offers Isaac, not only is it a picture of what's to come with Jesus Christ when he's laid on the cross for our sins, but it also it inspires Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, Moses to have the same faith in God to continue the blessings that would come here after this time in history right here, and spread the promises given to Abraham from God, that because Abraham obeyed in his faith to God. And the reason why, some would say, well, how could a man just kill his son, but it just said here that Abraham knew that it was God's problem. God gave him Isaac, and God had promised Abraham an everlasting seed. So Abraham knew that God was going to bring him back to life. This is the first time that you hear about the resurrection. That Abraham knew that God had promised that a nation was going to come through Isaac, so that God had to revive him. This is God's plan. This isn't Abraham's. So Abraham knew that God was going to, take care of the problem at hand, that it was God's problem. He was going to resurrect Isaac. He wasn't afraid at all. And it said, and he said, take now thy son, thy only son Isaac, whom thou lovest, and get thee into the land of Moriah, and offer him therefore a burnt offering upon one of the mountains which I will tell thee of. And Abraham rose up early in the morning and saddled his ass, and took two of his young men with him, and Isaac and his son, and they clave the wood for the burnt offering, and rose up, went unto the place of which God had told them. Then on the third day, why is third day important? Because the third day is always that time of resurrection. And then on the third day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place afar off. So they traveled for 3 days, and here's this place that Abraham lifted up his eyes, and he sees this Mount Moriah and all these other cases of mountains. But Abraham sees this place of which, God has sent him to. And this same Mount Moriah, this same place where Isaac is being offered right now, is the same place where Jesus Christ will, on Calvary, on Golgotha, on the hill of the skull, and he will die for the sins of the world on this exact same place. And Abraham said unto his young men, abide here with the ass, and I and the lad will go yonder and worship, and come again to you. And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it upon Isaac his son, and he took the fire in his hand and a knife, and they went both of them together. And Isaac spake unto Abraham his father, and said, my father? And he said, here am I, my son. And he said, behold the fire and the wood, but where's the lamb for a burnt offering? And this right here is a very important verse here. And Abraham said, my son, God will provide himself a lamb for a burnt offering. So they went both of them together. Let's read that again. My son, God will provide himself a lamb for a burnt offering. And why is that important? Because God provided Himself on Calvary, on the cross, for the offering for the sins of the world. And God provided Himself, Jesus Christ, Himself on that cross. So they went both of them together, and they came to the place which God had told him of. And Abraham built an altar there, and laid the wood in order, and bound Isaac his son, and laid him on the altar upon the wood. And Abraham stretched forth his hand, and took the knife to slay his son. And the angel of the Lord called unto him out of heaven, and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, Here I am, or here am I. Why is that important? Because anytime in the Bible when God wants to get something across to them, he always calls their name twice. Abraham, Abraham. Isaac, Isaac. And he said, Lay not thine hand upon thy lad, neither do thou anything unto him. For now I know that thou fearest God, seeing thou hast not withheld thy son, thine only son, from me. And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him a ram caught in the thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram, and offered him up for a burnt offering in the stead of his son. And Abraham called the name of the place Jehovah Jireh, as it is said to this day, in the mount of the Lord it shall be seen. So when Abraham calls this mountain Jehovah Jireh, it means that the Lord will provide. And it's still called Jehovah Jireh to this day, because it's the same place, like I said, where Jesus was crucified for us. And the angel of the Lord called unto Abraham out of heaven the second time, and said, By myself have I sworn, saith the Lord, for because thou hast done this thing, and hast not withheld thy son, thine only son, that in blessing I will bless thee, and in multiplying I will multiply thy seed, as the stars of heaven, and as the sand which is upon the seashore. And thy seed shall possess the gate of his enemies. And what's important about this, the sand represents the earth, and obviously the stars represent the heavenly. But when you get into Solomon's time, it actually says at the time after David, when God says, I'm going to bless them all, kings will come from the Solomon, before everything starts to go downhill, it actually says that he was blessed among all over the earth, on the sand, and all over the earth, that he was actually given the abundance of abundance at that time. But that's what God actually promised that to David. But that in that blessing I will bless thee, that in blessing I will bless thee, and in multiplying I will multiply thy seed as the stars of the heaven, and as the sand which is upon the seashore. And thy seed shall possess the gate of his enemies. And in thy seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because thou hast obeyed my voice. So this one event is why God, He blesses everybody. That's why Abraham is the father of us all, because he had the faith in God to hearken unto God's voice, and knew that God could quicken or make alive again Isaac. That's how much he trusted and believed God. And it's interesting, because just 2 chapters before, he didn't really believe that much in God, because he was telling Abimelech that was his sister, so he wouldn't be killed. But yet God had already made this promise to him. But now you see, no matter what, Abraham trusts God to do exactly what he said he was going to do, and that it will come to pass. So Abraham returned unto his young men, and they rose up, and they went together to Beersheba, and Abraham dwelt at Beersheba. And here it is again. You got the Holy Spirit, which writes this Bible. There's no doubt about this, because at this moment, after Isaac was offered, and obviously he was kind of resurrected again, because he didn't die, but he was resurrected in a way where the next time that you're going to see or hear about Isaac, he's going to be getting married. So, but it says here, so I'll read that again. So Abraham returned unto his young men, and they rose up and went together to Beersheba, and Abraham dwelt at Beersheba. So you got Abraham returning back to the young men. It does not mention Isaac's name, although we can believe that Isaac surely went with him, or maybe Isaac ran away and was scared to death and needed some time since his father tried to kill him. And it came to pass after these things that it was told Abraham, saying, Behold, Milcah, she hath also borne children unto thy brother Nahor. Huz, his firstborn, so she has some kids here. Buz, his brother, and Kemuel, and the father of Aram, and Cheez, and Hezron, or Hazo, and Pildash, and Jidlaph, and Bethuel, and Bethuel begot Rebekah. These 8 Milcah did bear to Nahor, Abraham's brother, and his concubine, whose name was Remuah. She bare also Tibah, and Gamah, and Thahash, and Milcah. I can, mispronounce a few more if you'd like, but we're going to start at 23. So, yeah, it tells you those because it's trying to tell you where Rebekah actually came from. And she actually came from Isaac's brother. She's one of Abraham's brother's children is Rebekah. And in chapter 23 here, this is when, so Sarah, she's going to die. And at the age of 127 years old, and back in the middle, we talked about even in Noah's day in chapter 6, God said that his spirit will only strive with man for 120 years. And here Sarah lives to be 127 years old. So we know now that it's not talking about that's, that man can only live to be 120 years. But this is where Abraham goes, and he pays 400 shekels of silver for a place to bury his wife and himself and his family in Hebron in the land of Canaan. So Abraham's wife Sarah, she passes away. He goes to Ephron, and he talks to these men about like buying a place here in Hebron and Canaan for his wife to lay her. And they argue with him, and they say, no, Abraham, what is this place between friends? You can just have it. And Abraham said, no, I will buy this place. This will be my place to lay. And they insist, and then Abraham insists, and he actually ends up giving them 400 shekels of silver for this place. And he buries Sarah in this ripe old age of 127 years old, and and she's buried in Hebron in the land of Canaan, which is interesting because God promised to give them the land of Canaan, and now you're going to have Sarah and Abraham and his descendants buried in Canaan, so they'll always live, or their bodies are actually in Canaan. And then you get to 24, and it says, Abraham was old, and he's stricken in years, he was stricken in age, and the Lord had blessed Abraham in all things. So Abraham right here in Genesis chapter 24 is about to make his servant, his head servant, promise that he's not going to take that he's not going to have a Canaanite woman marry his son Isaac, that he's going to go to his land over in Mesopotamia. And this is actually where you find Rebekah. Because if you go over here in Genesis chapter 22, verse 23, and Bethuel begot Rebekah. These 8 Milcah did bear to Nahor, Abraham's brother. So Nahor is Abraham's brother, and Milcah bare these children to Nahor. So Rebekah is, in a way, Abraham's niece. So Isaac, this servant, is going to go find Rebekah. And you can read that story if you'd like. It's about how the servant goes over there and he prays to the Holy Spirit, to God, how do I find this woman? And he meets her at a well, and he says, well, if she waters me and my camels, I'll know she's the one. And she actually waters him. She gives him water, and she gives his camels water, and he stays the night, and he meets Rebekah. He gives her all these jewels and bracelets and rings and all this stuff and gold, and her family the same. And her brother actually ends up being Laban. But her brother is Laban, and Laban is actually going to be the one in future time here and up in Genesis where Jacob actually runs to after he has the fight with Esau, and he runs to over here where Laban dwells over here in Mesopotamia, and he actually wants to be with Rachel. And he works for 7 years, and then he gets he gets the wrong one. He gets Leah. Then he works another 7 years, and he gets and then he gets Rachel. And and Laban is the cause of all this. You got Jacob's going to work for Laban for 14 years to receive the one wife that he wanted, but he gets married to two wives. But Laban will come into the picture later on. That's why you know that while you're reading this, all this right here is to show you a picture of what is to come. It says the name Laban, like you don't think of anything that being, it says, and Rebekah had a brother, and his name was Laban. And Laban ran out unto the man of the well. And you're thinking, well, why does that matter? Who cares that Rebekah has a brother named Laban? Well, you'll find out later on. It becomes important because that's where Jacob goes. And he actually finds his wife. And you got Laban knows that Jacob comes from Isaac and Abraham, and that he's of rich descendants. And Laban knows that he can get, that he can get something out of Jacob. And he knows that God is with Jacob, and Jacob actually ends up blessing his flock, and and he gets a lot out of Jacob. So Jacob and his wives actually they run away together. But then you come to chapter 25, and chapter 25, Abraham, he actually remarries Keturah, and she actually bears him 6 kids. And Abraham lives 175 years old, and he gives up the ghost. And Abraham was buried in the cave with his wife by his 2 sons, Ishmael and Isaac. So then you get down to and in these names, the sons of Ishmael, by their names according to their generations, the firstborn of Ishmael is Naboth and Kedar and Abiel and Mizpah and Dumah and Massa and all that, and Hadar and Timnah. You get 12 men that is born to Ishmael. It says these are the sons of Ishmael, and these are their names by their towns and their castles. 12 princes according to their nations. So Ishmael actually has 12 princes come from his loins, and he's blessed with 12 other nations that come from him. He's still not the one promised seed and the begotten son, but he had 12 princes under him that had 12 different nations that we'll again learn about more as the Bible goes on. And these are the years in life of Ishmael. And Ishmael lived to be 137 years old. And he gave up the ghost and died, and was gathered unto his people. And they dwelt there from Havilah unto Shur, that is before Egypt, and thou goest toward Assyria. So they're heading toward Assyria and Egypt. If you've ever seen a map, you're going to find out in Egypt and Exodus, that's where all this stuff goes down with Moses. But that's where Ishmael died at, is over there between Assyria and Egypt, which are actually 2 places that overtook the Israelites, that overtook the Jewish people. But that's where Ishmael, that's where he died. And these are the generations of Isaac, Abraham's sons, and Abraham begot his son. So Isaac was actually 40 years old when he took Rebekah to a wife. And you'll actually find out later on it took about 20 years. And in her days to be delivered were full. Behold, there was twins in her womb. And the first came out red, all over like a hairy garment. And they called his name Esau. Esau it means red. Well, just like Edom means red, Esau is a hairy man. It means red. And after this came his brother out, and his hand took hold on Esau's heel, and his name was called Jacob, and Isaac was 80 years old when she bare him. So you got Isaac, his name means laughter. You got Esau, his name means red, which is where the Edomites come from, and then they become cursed because they have, no love for the Jews. And you got Jacob's name actually means heel catcher or heel grabber, because he was clutching at the heel of Esau. But Abraham actually said, God actually says before this, and the children struggled together within her, and she said, if it be so, why am I thus? And she went to inquire of the Lord. Like, why are they fighting me so bad? And the Lord said unto her, 2 nations are in thy womb, and 2 manner of people shall be separated from thy bowels. And the one people shall be stronger than the other people, and the elder shall serve the younger. So that's actually true. Like Esau's, the Edomites, they were actually stronger than the Israelites. They actually ended up taking them over at one point. But the elder ended up serving the younger. So all this stuff that God prophesied, it's coming to pass. It's coming. And Isaac was 80 years old when she bare them. 80 means he was a score is 20, so he was 80. So he was 60 years old when he became a father. And Rebekah bore him Isaac and Jacob. I'm sorry, Esau and Jacob. And the boys grew, and Esau was a cunning hunter, a man of the field, and Jacob was a plain man dwelling in tents. And Isaac loved Esau because he did eat of his venison, which is deer meat. But Rebekah loved Jacob, and Jacob sawed pottage, and Esau came from the field, and he was faint, he was starving to death, he was so hungry. Esau comes in the house, and he's hungry. And Esau said to Jacob, feed me, I pray thee, that thou same red pottage, for I am faint. Therefore was his name called Edom. And Jacob said, sell me this day thy birthright. And Esau said, behold, I am at the point to die. And what profit shall this birthright do to me? And Jacob said, swear to me this day. And he sware unto him, and he sold his birthright unto Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and pottage of lentils, and he did eat and drink, and rose up and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. So when you get to so Jacob actually tricked Esau into giving him his firstborn birthright, which is interesting because when it comes to pass later on with Jacob, same thing with Jacob, he defrauded Esau for his birthright. Laban, Rebekah's brother, is actually going to defraud Jacob of the birthright of his firstborn daughter and make him take the firstborn daughter instead of Rachel, the secondborn, which is the one he wants. So all this stuff comes back on Jacob again. But that's actually where the 7 years of Jacob's trouble comes from. He worked 7 years for Leah, then he had to work another 7 years for Rachel. But so Esau's descendants, which become the Edomites, are the founders of Russia, China, and Japan. But his descendants were always hateful, and they always, were in spite and hated the Israelite people. But at the end of this, I want to wrap this up with talking about this. So you got all these promises coming, and all this stuff is starting to come to pass. It's going to make more sense later on, especially if you've read Moses and you know a little bit about the Egyptians, and the Egypt actually represents the world, and Egypt comes out of the world to be God's people. But all this stuff is coming to pass to show you something great for later on, where all this stuff ends up at Abraham and Abimelech, that they make that covenant, and then Egypt, they actually takes over the Israelites, so their covenant was actually made to none effect later on. But I want to talk about this. So you got Isaac. Isaac was the promised seed of God, right? He promised Abraham that you'll have a son, then all the nations will be blessed. So Jacob, we're about to start talking about, but Jacob, he has 12 sons. And Jacob's name actually ends up being changed to Israel. That's where they get Israel from, because Jacob wrestled with the Lord, and Jacob said, bless me, and God called his name Israel. And Israel means fights with God. And that's what Jacob was doing at the time. He was fighting with God. That's where the name Israel and the Israelites come from. But Jacob has the 12 sons of Israel, and Israel are the Israelites, and the one true God were the one true God of Israel. And God's going to make promises, more promises to Israelites, the promises and the good things that are going to happen to the Jewish people, and the bad things and the bad promises that are going to come to the Jewish people if they don't hearken to God's voice and do what they tell them to do. But it's interesting that Ishmael, actually, he was actually a nation that had 12 princes. And those 12 princes, they actually come, Ishmael's lineage are of the Arabs over there that fight with Israel to this day, that are still fighting with Israel to this day. And, their God is actually Muhammad, from where he believed that's because Ishmael was truly the firstborn son. And that's why the Israelites and the Arabs in Israel fight for that land over there to this day, right now into 2024, and they're actually fighting even more since last year, and just more hell is coming to the Jewish people now. But I promise you, God is still their chosen God, and Israel is still God's chosen people, and I believe that He will take care of them. But this is why they fight right now, because it goes all the way back now to where we're talking about now, and in Genesis 20 to 25, is Ishmael was technically Abraham's firstborn son, but he wasn't the promised son. He obviously Isaac was the promised son. So it's just interesting that the history, how do you know where you're going until you know where you've been, right? So it's just important to know that even though this is in the beginning of the Bible, that how truly important that these chapters are and why they're so important. Because when we move on, we get to Jacob and the 12, and we get to the 12 tribes of Israel, and we get into Moses, and we get into him rescuing the people, and they become the 12 tribes of Israel later on. It all filters back and comes back to here. And this is why these things happen. That's why it's important to study the Bible, read it, understand it, and know that the promises God made to the Jewish people and the Israelites, those are promises made to them, right? God didn't make the same promises to me and you. Just like that circumcision. God didn't tell Abraham to circumcise until after Ishmael was already 13 years old, which is what they say is a grown man. And that, when you're 13, you're liable for your own sins. That's why you become a man. They have a bar mitzvah for a man. He's becoming a man. He now owns up for his own sins. And that's when God tells him to circumcise. Because if you're of the circumcision, you're of my people. If you're not of the circumcision, you're uncircumcised, you are cut off. Well, just like with us, we believe in the gospel, and we are sealed with the Holy Spirit of promise. We are, technically, we are God's people. We are saints. We are the chosen ones of God because we believed in the gospel. So it's just important to know that all these great stories in the beginning, it's going somewhere, and we'll soon get there. So it says Abraham and Isaac. This is Genesis 20, chapters 20 to 25. It is 2424, and it's been a lot of fun. I guess it probably wasn't that long, but that's okay. We'll be working on Jacob and Esau and their conflict next. And we'll roll on from there. So I hope this has helped you out. I hope you enjoyed it. And I appreciate everything. Appreciate you being here. And I love you. Bye.